Okay, so today we're looking at a full composition instead of just a figure. Um, it's not bad. I like the limited color scheme. I like the mood. I even like uh, the emotion behind it. But there are a few things that can be significantly improved, namely the perspective, the lighting, and the contrast. So let's go ahead and make that happen. First, we need a horizon line. What we notice is that this image is at a slight tilt, like that. It's not a straight horizon line. So we have to pay attention to that when creating our um, our perspective grid. That's assuming the horizon line is right there. Best way to do that is actually just take a line and run it longer than it needs to be. Once you do that, you can rotate it and just place it. So that tells me that's where that needs to be. The next one probably be somewhere right here. No, that's not it either. So let's create a new layer and repeat that process. Just create a straight line. Doesn't matter if it's running along those edges correctly, because we can rotate it now until it does. Rotate it. And there, that's where my vanishing point is, right here. That means, and since it's 1 point perspective, that means all edges will be going towards that point. Um, Now I create the horizon line and I rotate that as well. And how do I know the angle of the horizon line? Well, I'm lining it up with either this edge on the street right there or this roof right here. Since it's all 1 point perspective, it doesn't really matter which one I choose because all horizontal edges are going to be lined up parallel to each other. Once I have that, I can start going with the other edges. So I can get this one right here, and that tells me the perspective is off over there. Um, it also tells me the perspective is off on this right here. Let's see if it's off on the roof. Yep, off on the roof. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this perspective grid and get back to you guys when it's all done. All right, so there's the grid. Um, Now that that's complete, I can go back and fix what needs to be fixed. I'll go ahead and do a paint over so that we're not wasting too much time. Um, and I'm just going to focus on the background for now. So let's go ahead and take a look at this wall. Let's see, increase the opacity to 80%. It's going to line up with this line right there, this one right here, and this one right there. All right, so I've got that wall pretty much covered. It's in perspective now, and I can go through and depending on the feeling I want to give, I can play with variations. So let's go ahead and get a bigger brush, a little bit darker there. Something like that. Let's see here. Now I'm going to get the ground plane. Just have it naturally fade off into the distance while following the general angle implied by the perspective lines. So that's going towards that vanishing point from there to there. So that's my ground plane. So now that I have that, what I can do is play with some variations to help give it some more space and depth. Let's try that right there. Maybe. Something like that should work. So you might be asking, why did I make it darker here but lighter here? That just, the alternating gradients just help give it some depth. If I made it dark here, light here, it makes it hard to separate the contours and the edges when they touch each other. And that makes the illusion of depth a little bit more difficult to sell. But by alternating it, by having alternating gradients, I can create the illusion of depth much more easily. So whereas I had it darker here and lighter here at the bottom of the screen, I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to have it lighter here and darker here. I'm going to make this about the same value, but at the same time pay attention to the perspective grid. Something like that should work. Let's go ahead and maybe even just all right. So I've got those gradients set up. Now it's time to do it for the other wall. So let me just go back and see what I'm looking at exactly. So I need a ground plane right here. Something to imply that there's a building right there. All right. So I need to draw a building right here. Let me see the perspective grid. That means I'm not going to be seeing this side of the wall because my vanishing point is right here. So I'm not going to be seeing this perspective on the building. What I'm actually going to be seeing is this perspective. So what I'm just going to get is a flat shape right there. And that's fine. It just has to be painted in an interesting way. So once I go ahead and lay all that in, I can light that up. And this is just a temporary color to help separate it for me. A temporary value. It might change, depends on how the rest of it comes together. What is definitely needed is this needs to be darker because we have a light source right here. And that means this wall is facing away from the shadow. So once I have that, I can go in and choose a darker value. And I can play with that a little later, making it lighter or darker, but just setting it up, just doing the setup for it right now, will help me figure out the values later on. Trying to get a straight line there. Doesn't have to be exactly straight because in real life there are no such things as perfectly straight lines, and a little bit of jagged edges is fine. One thing you can do a little bit later is to break up this shape right here to really emphasize that irregularity found in nature and in real life. So, for example, I might take this in just a little bit, make it a diagonal right there or something. I'm going to save that until later just so that I get all my basic shapes in. And I really hate Photoshop's controls. Unfortunately, it's one of the easiest programs to paint in, so I'm stuck using it. Especially for doing paint overs. I prefer Mischief or Made with Mischief personally, but it has a hard time importing other JPEGs and images created in other programs into it. Alright, so now that that's working, more or less, what this could use is a roof. That one's going to need to be darker than the sky, because if you look at real life, and that's a great way to learn, is study life. what you're going to find is that the sky is lighter than the building at night. And that's because the sky is lit by stars and the moon and the sun. Well, the sun's being reflected off the moon and into the atmosphere, if you want to be technical about it. But generally speaking, the sky is lighter than the buildings around it. All right, so now that we have that basic idea in there, we're going to need now here's the problem here. This roof blends into that roof, so how do we keep the illusion of light as well as the illusion of perspective and depth going strong? Well, we could try a couple of things. For one, we can try, and I'm just lining up these edges with the perspective grid I've already set up. So one thing we can do is try lightening this up just a little bit. Maybe something like that. We don't even have to lighten it up evenly. We can just go something like that with the gradient. But that destroys the illusion of depth, in my opinion. And one thing you'll notice is that I'm taking a very trial and error process to this, because I'm not using reference. I'm just flying by the seat of my pants, sort of. So if I lighten this front roof, this roof in the front right here just a little bit, it just flows better a little. All right, so one thing I have to do is lighten this up right here because of the gradient pattern we set up. Maybe something like that. And again, these are just rough blocking in of the gradients. It's not meant to be smooth. But you can see already how it's setting up a value pattern, a hierarchy of values. And this is meant to imply a cast shadow so that we have the light of this even shining on this wall right here. You can see how we're setting up a value pattern to create depth already, as well as using the correct perspective. Here's my problem with this part right here. It's too bright white. It needs just a little bit of finessing, in my opinion. So it's going to be the brightest part of the image in general, but that doesn't mean there cannot be any variation here. Let's go ahead and see the angle of that right there. Let's see, what if we take this value right there? Angle. Something like that, maybe. Yeah, that should work. Let's try and lighten that up. maybe something like that. Now we just need Alright, so that's more or less our value pattern. Alright, that's working. Now let's try and hit, let's see, what do I need? I need that light source coming from here. I'll create a new layer. Get this working. It's right about there, right? A little bit right there. Now we need to define this plane just a little bit more to give this wall some thickness. If I remember correctly, there's some sort of step over there. So we've got to imagine this staircase is coming out like that. Break up the pattern there. Now we need to break off maybe something like that. And we can add a little bit of gradient here to show that the light's further away. Maybe darken that just a little, lighten this. And all we're doing is following the light pattern there. Actually, what we can do is leave a little bit of cast shadow there. Something like that. Maybe darken that just a little. Something like that. We also have this light on this wall right here, implying that the light is directly to the side. So we need to be able to continue that. And we're going to use the perspective right here. the purple lines. That should give us this slightly angled. That should give us this slightly angled line. I can go here and brighten that up. Something. Once I have that, I can erase that. Something like that. Once I have that, I have another lit area right there. This angle is wrong right here. Fix it as easily as that. So I need another light source right here. It's going to be darker because it's further away from the camera, and remember that the further something is away from the further something is from the light, the darker it's going to be. And I can something as simple as that. Break up the pattern there just a little bit. Something like that should work. What's left? Let's try. All right, so now that I have this stuff set up, I can go ahead and paint the tree that we have over there. Gonna create a new layer for that. And if you've ever looked at trees in the night, they tend to be fairly dark. But here's the trick. I need the tree to be lighter than this, to be darker than this value, but lighter than that. So what I'm going to do is take this value and just go ahead and paint something. I'm just blocking it in. One thing I can do now is darken. That doesn't follow the light logic. So one thing I might have to do is brighten. Maybe something like that. So now that I have my tree, I can maybe something. Okay, so what next? Am I happy with that tree? Let's take a look. No, I'm not happy with it. Let's go ahead and darken this just a little bit to help it stand out from that roof. All right, what else do I have going on here that I can fix? Maybe darken this just a little right there. All right, that seems to be working. So now I've got to add the characters. Well, we have a trash can right there. So let's go ahead and follow that perspective logic of the grid up top. There's my trash can. It's gonna have to be darker than than that piece of the wall so that it stands out. But we don't want it standing out too much. And this is a great place where reference can come in because right now it's just a generic trash can. But what we can do is look up what trash cans in Japan really look like and make that something much more authentic. I'm assuming that this is Japan anyway. It feels very Japanese. So we need to lighten that part right there. Darken this part right here. Get maybe just a little bit brighter right there. Maybe something like that. And if that stands out too much, we can start to yeah, that's working pretty well, I think. You can, of course, go in and detail it more, but the idea is to stick with this light logic. So if you were to go in and paint in the windows here, for example, you would not use values much darker than this right here. You just want to hint at it. So maybe something like, yeah, there's a pretty, might be a little bit, there we go. So we wouldn't want to get much darker than that. Even that I feel is a little bit too dark. But the idea is that you want to stay within that light logic so it stays separated. So you keep your values separated and clear. And that's going to help give it depth and a feeling of much more realism than you would get otherwise. Let's see if I can pull that just a little bit darker. Break up those shapes just a little. I don't like that. That one seems to be okay. How's that feeling? Yeah, that's working okay. And then I'd just go in and place the characters. So that's one way to get your background working correctly. Let's flip it one more time. I think I see something off here. Yeah, this ground seems to be curving. Just straighten that up right there. We can go ahead and add some clutter and things like that, but this is light logic you want to play with, and that's where I'm going to leave it. Thanks for your time.